Will Red Ed's energy price freeze lead to power shortages and blackouts?
I feel that the Conservatives could easily steal a march on their Labour colleagues by removing VAT from fuel charges. After all, when we have to eat, we have food, no VAT. When we need roof over our heads, no VAT on rents. So why not for fuel as well? They're basics of life.
Did you see this as Red Ed and socialism returning to the Labour Party?
To an extent, but I mainly thought of it as cynical, Ed, because you can have a priority for green energy or you can have a priority for affordable energy, but you can't have a priority for both, because we're still at a stage where green energy demands enormous subsidies, and it was in fact Ed Miliband as Energy Secretary who started this whole process in train and was the force behind the Climate Change Act, has persuaded the rest of the EU to adopt these eye-wateringly tough carbon reduction targets. And I think there's a sort of tacit deal that's been going on between the political class and the big energy suppliers, which is basically, if you agree to invest in all our very expensive and not yet very reliable green sources of energy, we'll turn a bit of a blind eye.
You're against green, are you?
I'm not against green at all. I think it's a very disproportionate response.
Too much money being spent?
Well, I also think it's astonishing the political class hasn't reacted to the massive decline in living standards we've had until now, and that Ed Miliband was the author of this process, which of course Cameron's trendy Tories and the Lib Dems went along with, and now Ed Miliband is standing back from the consequences of the process that he's instigated. So yes, let's develop green energy, but let's do it in a proportionate way and not send people, you know, freezing to death in winter because they can't afford the energy bill.
What's your answer, Douglas Alexander?
Well, Patrick's just wrong. I mean, the proportion of the rise in prices that can be accounted for by green energy is actually a small fraction. What we've seen
I
is
think it's
profiteering.
£110 a year
let me finish the point, Patrick.
on top of bills.
In fact, I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but I am. You are right that a lot of the increase since 2007 has been due to wholesale gas prices, because we no longer, in North Sea's but declining, so we have to import gas. But actually, going forward from now, the big increases will come from green tariffs. And my problem with this is it's been a cosy arrangement between all three political parties and the energy companies, but they haven't asked you. Who has to pay for it? Nobody seems to have got the tacit approval from consumers who, by 2020, will be facing up to £300 a year more in their energy bills because of green energy. Now, if you guys decide that's what you want, fine. But I think this has been a cosy stitch-up where ordinary people have not been asked, do you want to pay for this?
OK.
Is Ed Miliband the right man for the job?
Patrick O'Flynn.
No, he's the wrong man. He leads the wrong party, but then again, so does Nick Clegg and so does David Cameron. This is a leader in a party that would take us deeper into the European Union, that won't give us a referendum on getting our sovereignty back, that won't have any cap on immigration, even though it kind of admits it got it wrong, but it won't tell us what its actual policy is, that won't really do the tough stuff on welfare reform, says it will have an overall cap, but hasn't identified any single cut in working age benefits that it's for, and on a whole range of policies is just not capable of governing the country in the national interest. Whatever you say...
Is it the party or the man you're criticising here?
Well, I think that they're kind of almost the same thing, because he's a comfort blanket for Labour activists, isn't he? He doesn't challenge them at all. He gives them what they want to hear. He's quite crafty at finding populist ways of making left-wing ideas sound palatable to a large-ish number of people. But whatever you say about Tony Blair, and I've said some unkind things, and many of us have, at least he identified that what the public wants to see is a party prepared to challenge its own weaknesses. And Labour's number one weakness was its refusal to control immigration at all. Its number two weakness was its total inability to keep a control on the welfare budget. Its number three weakness was this belief in tax and spend, and they called it Keynesianism, but it's a complete misinterpretation of what Keynes believed, because he believed in running surpluses.
OK,
well, let's not
have the whole manifesto. in answer to the question. Michael Gove, before I come to you on the other point,
Yeah, sure.
do you want to see these debates again?
I think debates are a good thing. I think the more that we can engage voters in these issues, the better.
That ain't quite the answer to the question.
Yes or no?
Do you want to see
The one thing I've learned in my brief career in politics is don't make promises on behalf of the Prime Minister without asking him first. The principle that there should be a debate, I completely agree with.
Running scared is Ed Miliband, who did want Nigel Farage in the debates but won't countenance it now, not since the South Shields by-election.
I do have to say, I think that having a debate about having a debate is actually quite a boring debate. The broader point
What about
is...
UKIP?
What about... Well, I'm not
Should they
voting
be
for
there?
UKIP.
No, should they be in the debate?
Look, we were asked about Ed Miliband.
Yeah.
Now you're asking me about a debate. I have a view. I'm debating with UKIP as well. I'm debating with a variety of people. I'm always happy to debate myself on any platform, at any time, on any issue.
Okay.
But what I'm not going to do is to commit anyone else.
I just wanted to say it's quite remarkable how Mr Gove keeps hammering on about Labour's education policy when you yourself are the only Secretary of State for Education who's actually been given the vote of no confidence by the National Union of Teachers. You know, the fact that the only people in your home simply don't believe in you. In fact, there's so much criticism against your new national curriculum.
Can I just say that Michael probably regards that as a badge of honour in that respect. I would agree with him. But Michael is certainly a more consumer-orientated, parent-orientated Secretary of State than Ed Balls, who preceded him, and I think that's a good thing. But what I do regret is that you won't bring back academic selection in the state system through grammar schools so that ordinary talented kids can give the old Etonians who are in charge of your party a run for their money.
The man in the pink shirt there.
What has the government learned from the siege in Kenya, and can the British public feel confident that it couldn't happen here?
Yes, if it turns out that the so-called White Widow is involved, a former British citizen, is that surely not worrying how someone like that can just disappear off the radar, being that her previous partner was involved in the 7-7?
Patrick O'Flynn.
Well, it's certainly more than worrying. Can I just begin my answer by saying we should also not forget the victims of the terrible atrocity in Pakistan,
yes.
Where the Christian minority suffered grievously a mass murder this week. And we should not forget Christian minorities across the world living in predominantly Islamic countries. We don't like to talk, or we don't tend to dwell on what's happening to them, but what a terrifying existence they live. Now, on the White Widow and the various atrocities across the world in which we find a British connection, I mean, that really is shameful. And it was for many years that journalists, indeed, like Melanie Phillips, were warning about the phenomenon of Londonistan and us not taking seriously the radical Islamic scene that was going on in our own capital city. And the birds are kind of coming home to roost here. And I also think, and, you know, people like me maybe go on about the sort of trendy liberal left a bit too much. But in this instance, there was a sort of cultural norm that was set up over the last 40 years or so of crude multiculturalism, which held that there should be no effort to integration at all. And I don't want a society where everybody has to eat roast beef on a Sunday and go to the football on a Saturday afternoon and that sort of stultifying thing. But we do need to work much harder on establishing a core common culture of values that we all subscribe to, whether it's equality between the sexes, freedom of speech, respect for everybody's right to self-determination. And there's a huge sort of decades-long chasm there, which for reasons of political correctness has had terrible consequences, and that we do need to be much more proactive. And I know the last government did take some steps, and this government's carrying them on, but I think we've got a long way to go on that score.
Right. Does anybody else not find it shocking that as soon as we started having a conversation about terrorism, both Douglas and Michael instantly started talking about Islam? It seems to me that this government is always just peddling Islamophobia, blaming violence on everything. Is it not surprising that then 1 in 4 people are always suspicious of Muslims? Why can we not talk about terrorism without bringing Islam into it?
I mean, there is a fairly obvious answer to that question, which is that it was an Islamist terrorist attack, and it tends to be these days. Okay.
Following on from Ed Balls' speech at the Labour Party conference this week and the heavy criticism for the HS2 project from so many independent bodies, isn't it about time this government scrapped HS2?
Patrick O'Flynn,
Well, my party is against HS2 and wants it scrapped straight away, completely.
All right.
And can I just say, we've got a clear position on it. I think Ed Balls was very cynical because he's kind of sitting on the fence, but the effect of what he said will make it very hard for the project to make much progress anyway over the next couple of years. But I think it's an enormous vanity project, and the money could be vastly better spent on 10 large projects or 20 medium-sized projects, updating our whole public transport infrastructure. It's the wrong project. The cost-benefit analysis hasn't been done correctly either. It's ludicrous.
Michael Gove.
I travel a great deal by train, and one thing I notice is that on most of the long-distance rail routes, there is a train every hour, or there is 2 trains an hour, and I can't believe that making those existing routes run a train every 15 minutes, every 20 minutes, isn't vastly cheaper than building a new massive railway line. I'd also comment, I happen to be a pilot, I occasionally fly myself on business. There are routes in this country where I can fly myself in my own aeroplane to a meeting cheaper than going by second-class rail. And for as long as that's the case, we really don't want to be spending a vast amount more money on additional railway lines.
Douglas Alexander, is Labour trying to come out from under this HS2 project with what Ed Balls said at the conference?
It may disappoint members of the audience, but we support a north-south railway, but we think it is entirely sensible to say there cannot be a blank cheque for this project.
Yes.
Yeah, this is going to be the biggest vanity project ever brought forward in this country. All it is for vain politicians to put their name to it, and then they years later they'll think, oh, what a great project. It's going to be unattainable. It's not going to be effective. It's going to be too expensive. There's going to be things like video conferencing, which allows people to talk to each other. They don't need to travel by train.
And another, you start there. On that gangway there, if you can get to
Will the Labour Party tell us before the next election what their final view is on this and stick to what they say?
Will the Labour Party say what their view is?
Before the next election and stick to what they say?
Oh, I expect we'll set out our position on this when we see whether this number of 42 billion is robust.
Will Self.
Don't be all NIMBYist about it. It's a crap idea wherever you live.
All right.
No.
All right. Time's up, I'm afraid. We have to stop there.